In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Very good morning, St. Peter's and St. Paul's. Nice to be with you, albeit remotely, once again. And especially at this time of year. It's such a special time of year, both in church terms, with Easter just round the corner. But I'm recording this on an absolutely beautiful, sunny Wednesday afternoon. Real hint of spring in the air, and that just is fab. It's kind of what we need at the moment, isn't it? I do hope you're keeping well and surviving these times as well as may be. I'm taking as my text today the gospel reading, which I hope you'll have heard by now. It's one of the ones that is set as part of a sequence of readings through Lent, building up towards Easter. And it's from John chapter 12, and reading from verse 20. And although we are, in terms of chapters, only about halfway through John's Gospel, just over, Jesus has at this point already ridden into Jerusalem. This follows on in chapter 12, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which of course in the Synoptic Gospels is placed much later. And the reason for that is that John, whose Gospel is full, as you know, of symbolic meaning as well as sort of literal meaning, John saw huge importance in those last 2 or 3 days of Jesus' earthly life, and particularly in the Last Supper. And so 5 of the chapters that follow, 13 through to 17, will be devoted just to the Last Supper. But of course, John puts a great deal of Jesus' teaching into that, the importance of the occasion, emphasizing the importance of the teaching, and vice versa. It's typical of the sort of thing John does. So here we are, chapter 12. Jesus has just ridden into Jerusalem. And having done so, some Greeks who were among those who had gone to Jerusalem to worship during the festival come to Philip and say, "Sir, we want to see Jesus." Interesting. Greeks. Now, we're not told anything more about them except that they were Greeks. But they're in Jerusalem for Passover. So presumably these were Greeks who had converted to the Jewish faith. That was by no means unknown. But there's a hint here already in this passage, and we'll see it again a little later on. There's a hint here that what is about to happen to Jesus and the consequences of that, the opening up of this new relationship with God that is going to be made possible by Jesus' death on the cross, all of that is going to be available not just to Jewish believers of the immediate Judean surroundings, if you like. There were those amongst the disciples who, when the Christian mission began after the death and resurrection, would have limited it to Jews, and particularly to those Jews who lived locally. There's a hint here that it's actually going to be for more than them, as Jesus will say a little further on, "When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw everyone to me. There are sheep not of this fold that I must bring in," he says elsewhere in the Gospel. It may be an obvious thought to you and me, but it certainly wasn't to the church, the early Christians of that time. So some Greeks come to Philip. Philip has a Greek name, and so perhaps that's why they sought him out. We don't know. And they say, "Sir, we want to see Jesus." Interesting choice of word, isn't it? We want to see Jesus. Not we want to meet him. Not even we want to follow him. I say not even. That would have been the big thing, wouldn't it? We want to see him. And if we're not careful, we might be tempted to dismiss this as a kind of sort of early example of celebrity culture. We've heard about this guy, we just want to see him. But that would be to miss the point that the word see in John is always significant. And John usually endows that word with a depth of meaning that goes beyond seeing with our physical eyes. There's often a sense in John that if we really see, we will understand who Jesus is and perhaps come to faith. And that phrase, come and see, is a phrase that comes up and again and again and again. You remember that Jesus calling the disciples right at the beginning of the gospel, and some skepticism amongst those who are told that this could be the Messiah. Come and see is the phrase that's used, because if you actually come and see and really see with the eyes of your heart as well as the eyes in your head, then you will kind of get it. You will get who Jesus is. It's kind of what we hope and pray for, isn't it? For all of those that we know, family, friends, whoever, who have never experienced the truth of Christ, who never had that encounter with Christ, that they would actually see who he is, and out of that seeing might come to faith. So this isn't just about a sort of celebrity thing. We want to see Jesus. Maybe they just meant literally set eyes on him. But I think John hints at a deeper meaning. And so Philip goes off and he tells Andrew, and the two of them went and told Jesus. And I think the most striking thing about Jesus' response is that he doesn't answer their question at all. That's not unknown for Jesus. Jesus, as you know, was a man capable of very single-minded vision, which, as I think I've said before, must have made him quite hard to live with sometimes. He's so focused, so absolutely focused, that it actually, must have been quite a challenge to live and work alongside him. But understandably, at this point, his mind is filled with what is to come. He's filled with what is to happen to him and what it all means and why. And so instead of saying anything about the Greeks, responding in any way to what Philip and Andrew say, it's almost like he's thinking aloud here. It's almost like, they don't need to be here. Because he responds, the hour has now come for the Son of Man to receive great glory. And then he gives them this image of the seed that falls into the ground, that only comes to fruition, only comes to its potential, only fulfills what it could be if it is buried. And he finds in that, of course, a powerful analogy for what is going to happen to him. And it's an analogy that he suggests might have implications for those who choose to follow him, that people must be prepared to set aside their own lives, their own agendas, for the sake of what God may ask of them and for the gospel. And you can understand how at a moment Jesus is trying to make sense of what is happening to him. He knows what's going to happen. He's known for a long time, but he knows that now it's upon him. And that there's kind of no going back. The wheels are in motion. And what will be and will be soon. And then in verse 27, you get this little sort of wobble moment. Now my heart is troubled. Well, I'll bet. Now my heart is troubled. What shall I say? Shall I say, Father, do not let this hour come upon me? No, that is why I came, so that I might go through this hour of suffering. Father, bring glory to your name. And that's as close as John gets to the Garden of Gethsemane. In the Synoptic Gospels, which so movingly portray a Jesus really in an agony of prayer, struggling from a human point of view, if you like, to align himself with God's will. and what he knows the Father is asking of him. You don't get that in John. You don't really get that. You just get these verses. That's the only moment of wobble. Because interestingly, John portrays a Jesus who is absolutely confident that this path, this awful path down which he knows he must go, is the will of God, and through it, God's will be accomplished. So the Jesus of John's Gospel is a confident, trusting Jesus, with just this moment where he admits that his heart is troubled, which has to be the understatement of a lifetime. But to confirm him in his identity and in his mission, the voice of God speaks. Voice comes from heaven. I have brought glory to my name and will do so again. That voice that spoke at his baptism, that voice that spoke up the mountain of transfiguration, confirming that he is on the right path, confirming that he is the Son of God. And you remember that Jesus finds all of his strength and purpose in that sense of identity with the Father. And nobody emphasizes his identity as the Father's Son the way that John does. Right from the beginning of the Gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and he came and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. All through John's Gospel, there is this, I and the Father are one, says the Jesus of John's Gospel. And there's this identity between the two, and in that, Jesus finds his strength. And then he tells his followers that actually God has spoken not for his benefit. He knows. He doesn't need to be told, doesn't need to be reminded, but that it's for the benefit of those standing there, that they may be assured that against everything that humanly they might believe, this is actually God's will that is being played out. This is all part of God's purpose, and that in the fullness of time they will understand. Because in being lifted up, as he says, in being lifted up, I will draw everyone to myself. And so we are faced with this astonishing paradox that we confront every Easter, that something that is 100% horrible, 100% bad for Jesus, and suffering beyond our imagining, is 100% part of God's will and God's plan. And how does that work? And there's a mystery in that, the depths of which I think we will never plumb this side of heaven. It's a great, extraordinary thing. And so we read this message again as we enter Passiontide, as we approach Easter. And it reminds us again that this actually was part of God's plan, and Jesus knew it was, and he entered into it willingly, knowing that it was. And that he did so, as I say, knowing exactly what it would cost him, but in complete confidence that this was part of the Father's plan, in a way, as I say, that I don't think we can fully grasp in our culture, or even at all, the depths of what really happened on the cross. What happens with Jesus as he dies, what happens in those hours between 3:00 on the Friday and an empty tomb on the Sunday morning. I don't think we can get to the bottom of that or to the depths of that. All that we know is that something fundamental changes, and some new relationship with God that was not possible before is now made possible. Something absolutely new begins, and there is a real sense in which the world will never be the same again from that moment on. And I don't know about you, but that's a message I rejoice to hear again, well, every year really, but perhaps this year particularly, as we hit the first anniversary of lockdown, as we've lived through a year of this awful pandemic. and all that that's meant for so many people in terms of livelihood and illness and sadly in many cases of bereavement. And we rejoice that there is light at the end of that particular tunnel. And it doesn't stop it being a tunnel, just as it didn't for Jesus. Just because he knew there was light at the end of the tunnel, as I say, it was still a tunnel. It was still a dark place and a dark time, as these months have been for us. But it reminds us that there is a light. It may be a distant one sometimes. It may feel hard to grasp. And it may be that in times of darkness we don't sense the presence of God, or the presence of God is hard to find, or hard to feel, or hard to sense. But that doesn't mean that the presence of God is absent. And what the Easter message, in all of its glory and all its fullness, reminds us is that there is one who walks with us through the tunnel, through the darkness, through the valley of the shadow of death. Because ultimately, as Jesus knew, the only way is through, not round. Through's the only way. And he walks with us and alongside us, even if that's hard to find, and even if that's something we can only perceive much further down the track looking back, and maybe not even then, but it doesn't stop it being true. My friends, I wish you a blessed and restorative and joyous Easter. May God bless you.